Hi fellow plant people, welcome back if you are returning to my channel, and if you are new, my name is Jen. I go by the Leafy Geek here and also on Instagram. And today for this video, it is the long-awaited garden recap. So I would like to share a little bit about how my gardening experience in 2021 went. I did a lot of new things this year. The biggest, of course, 95% of my garden was started from seed this past year. There were a few things that obviously, I purchased in either plant form or they weren't really like started from seed. They were bulbs or they were already kind of established plants when I picked them up. But honestly, 95% is fairly accurate, if not a little bit on the low estimate, if I'm being honest with myself, because most of my flowers, all of my herbs, and then most of the vegetables that I grew this past year were seed started right there in my kitchen. I just wanted to quick, run through things and give you kind of a running list of the best of my garden. I've got a few categories because I'm a list maker and a categorizer, and so that's just what I do. So I've got the best of, like my veggies, herbs, flowers, etc. But first I kind of just want to share just general thoughts about how things went. What worked, what didn't, what I'm going to change. So general thoughts. The seed starting was something I really hadn't done before. My previous gardens back in my yard here had been small plants, basically transplants that I purchased from my local garden center. So the seed thing was brand new. I'd always wanted to try it, and I got inspired on here by several gardeners on YouTube who kind of had their practice down, and they had some really good tips and tricks. I learned a lot from YouTube gardening. From that corner of YouTube, you guys are phenomenal, and I appreciate each and every one of you for the wealth of information that gets put onto this site about gardening, every year. It's great. So seeds were new for me, and also flowers were new for me. I had never really had a flower bed or a flower garden before. I'd always been pretty strictly veggie focused. I have, I think it's like a 15 by 25 foot plot in my backyard or on this property. I have been gardening in that plot for several years now. But I also this year had gotten permission to cut some flower beds into my yard. And so my direct yard, I kind of have a section fenced off for the hound dog. And I'd always kind of thought about maybe doing some sort of landscaping within that little plot. I had full permission from my landlords to do that. But it was one of those things that I just never really got around to, but then COVID happened, and I was like, well, I need a project. I need more. Let's do more. Let's do more out here. And so that's what I did. I cut my own flower bed. It's kind of a border in my yard, and I decided that was going to be for flowers. Of course, I did the research and went with dog safe that I could. Then I kind of weighed my options because I have a bit of a slopey yard as well. And so that flower bed kind of took up a lot of like the level real estate that exists in my yard. I decided instead of doing a flower bed on a slope, because that involves what I'd ultimately want to do is tiered beds. So in-ground kind of staircase tiers down the hill. Short of doing that, I opted for grow bags this year. So that was another experiment on my part. I've never grown anything in a grow bag. I've been hearing, kind of positive, feedback about it on YouTube here. A lot of folks that use them and swear by them as opposed to, like regular pots or other vessels. I'm not knocking any of those things, but just in terms of what I needed, and what I was, what my yard is able to accommodate, and what me as one person is able to achieve in a season, I felt that grow bags for me were the way to go. If I wanted to basically add to my garden inside of this fenced-in yard that I have. So that opened up actually a lot of real estate for me, using grow bags, because I got to grow more varieties. I had more room. I could put plants, vegetables into those grow bags and grow things in my yard, which freed up space in my 15 by 25 plot. So it's just distributing things over more ground really helped me this year, and I was able to grow a lot more. I grew some heirloom varieties of things. I grew multiple varieties of certain vegetables and flowers to figure out really what I liked. This was an experimental year for me. So what didn't go so well? I think there are a couple of things that I would focus on, and maybe try a few different things for next year. What I learned is that I really, really have to pay attention to spacing recommendations. Your plants are cute when they are small, seedling, little babies that you've nurtured through the winter and you're ready to get them all in the ground and you have so many of them. You gotta pay attention to how big they're gonna get. What the recommended spacing is, that is so important. And it's something that I sort of paid attention to. I did in the larger bed, the in-ground veggie bed. And the rest I kind of went a little crazy with. Specifically the flowers. That's something that I'm going to have to edit next year, because my flower bed was glorious. It was this beautiful, just sweeping, packed in, colorful plot in the corner of my yard here. But I'm going to show you some photos that kind of will help you understand what the eventual issues became. So I'm going to put those in right now. So most of you seasoned flower gardeners will notice immediately that I just didn't give plants the space to grow. Specifically, the celosia and the zinnias took over, and overall the look was fine, but that spacing issue definitely impacted the roses. That was my primary concern. None of my fall root vegetables worked out very well, and I'm wondering if I need to pay more attention to what the soil is doing at the end of the summer grow season, because I think it just got a little bit too compacted. I didn't retill it enough. I tried to add compost, which I think helped a little bit, but I just don't think those root vegetables, they hit a certain point and they didn't really have anywhere to go. So they just didn't really produce, or they produced above the soil. They kind of grew like stockish, for lack of a better term, just like grew up and out of the ground, but didn't form the root, which we eat, the tuber. Another thing that I tried, but didn't really love, I tried a few different growing situations for certain herbs and vegetables to try and, again, maximize the space in my yard and in my garden. And I tried these over the fence hanging planters that I thought would be perfect for herbs. But what I quickly learned is how quickly they dry out. And I felt like, the grow bags were fine. You do have to keep up on watering with those a little bit more frequently than everything you plant in ground. It's just the nature of, anything you grow in a container. It's going to, if you don't have it on drip, it's going to need frequent attention because they dry out faster. But these little things were just about that big, about the size of my head, and didn't hang right, and the herbs just weren't happy because a lot of the herbs that I had put into those were thirsty herbs. They weren't like rosemary and lavender, which, in second thought, just thinking about that would have made sense to put Mediterranean herbs that like hot and dry conditions into those bags. But then I'm also thinking, well, spider mites. Hot and dry, spider mites. And that's what happened too. They just totally dried out, got webbing all over them, just a mess, and it wasn't conducive to any sort of growth with the plants either. So I think I'll leave those out next year. I'm going to continue using these grow bags that I have for as long as they last, because they worked really well, and they were great for like statement planting. I put cannas in a bunch of these and they did phenomenal. I had cannas just like whoo. And then those were really easy to remove. I didn't have to like dig them out of the ground. They were just in a raised grow bag. So I could dig them out a little bit more easily for storage and over winter. So that's what I'm doing next year, I think, for sure. I'm keeping the grow bags, but I need to edit. I need to edit my flowers. I need to grow less or give away more would be ultimately the goal. Really just making sure that I'm growing the things next year that did well, that are hardy in my area, you know, because my zone is 4B. We don't get as much of a spring or as much of kind of a late harvest season that other places do. I mean, it frickin' snowed yesterday. It's gonna snow tonight. Like, we're in winter now, like that. I really need to focus in on the things that do really well, that produce a lot, and that were hardy to my zone. And so as maximizing the grow season as long as I can, and that I really just liked. And like I said, this was an experimental season. This was my opportunity to just play around and see what worked and what I liked. And I did that. And so I mean, I guess that's not really something that didn't go well. It's just some of the varieties didn't do as well as I had expected. Overall, I had a beautiful garden, and I was so happy with the results, just based on where I started back in February. I had no clear idea what it would turn into. I had a vision in my head, what I wanted, but I think the reality of it was so much better than I was expecting. So that was amazing. And I think I'm just going to continue to do the seed starting thing. I like this method. I like that cultivation process. You know, starting something from very tiny, giving it the perfect conditions that it wants, growing it up, acclimating it to outdoors, and then putting it in the ground and just reaping the benefits from that. So I'm going to continue that practice, I think, at least the next couple of years, maybe longer. We'll see. Okay, now on to the fun stuff, the best of. So I grew a ton of stuff this year. I should show you my gardening spreadsheet of everything that I'd started and planted and when. It's wild. It's all across the board. And we'll start with a few honorable mentions. They kind of are alone in their categories. I have a couple of categories plotted out for these delicious garden edible awesomeness. But these kind of were standalones. I either grew them with one other type, or, you know, just they really kind of stood out as things that I'm going to grow again. So I did grow a couple of bean varieties. I grew mosaic yard-long bean, which did okay. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun, and there was kind of a lot of bean to work with when you're cooking. So harvesting was fine, but the bean that I preferred, hands down, just because it was so productive, it produced so many beans over the course of the entire grow season, and it's just really darn pretty, are these dragon tongue beans. And these, it's a Dutch heirloom bean, and it just produced like you wouldn't believe. So these were seeds from Baker Creek, heirloom seeds. Highly recommend growing a dragon's tongue variety if you can get your hands on this, because my experience with it, it was just a really durable plant, and it made it through like the hottest point in the season. Not too thirsty. It could go, you know, a couple of bouts, you know, without water, because we did have a bit of a drought this year. So it held up fine. And it was producing, you know, up to the point where I wanted to pull it out to make room for some fall crops in that raised circle bed that I have in my yard. So dragon's tongue stood out as the bean for me. Another standout, kind of unique veggie that I am certainly going to be growing next year were these. So these were Mexican sour gherkins, or mouse melons, or cucamelons are also called. These ones are from Fruition Seeds, which they are kind of known for producing hardy varieties. So this plant was amazing. It grew so much. I had it in a grow bag on a trellis, and it just circled the trellis and went up into my dogwood tree and tried to attack the fence next to it. It was so prolific, and so many harvests just throughout the season. Started early, went late. Like, this was one of the last plants that I pulled out of my grow bags because it was still producing fruit. So definitely recommend this. So those were my kind of one-offs. Now we're getting into the categories. All right, best greens. So I had a lot of greens growing in my garden this spring, specifically this past spring. There were quite a few standout varieties. This was one of them. This is Linux lettuce. It's a fairly rare variety here in the US, but it's a slow bolt red lettuce. And then I'll show you a couple of other varieties that I grew. So none of the lettuce varieties that I grew this grow season really reached their full potential as head lettuce, but they were all really tasty as salad or leaf lettuce. I grew them in my main veggie plot and also on my patio. But the winner of the best greens category definitely goes to my spring Asian garden. So the greens in this masterpiece of a spring garden pictured here obviously got much bigger than this photo. It was taken earlier on in the spring, but the varieties pak choi, a baby pak choi, 2 varieties of tatsoi, and 3 different varieties of mizuna, or Asian mustard, were absolutely delightful, and they grew throughout the spring. The Asian spring beans garden was perfect. I'm definitely doing it again next spring. I might not change a thing because it was just so awesome. So my 2 varieties of mizuna that I have left, that I have been storing, so the golden frill and the scarlet frill. And these sprout pretty quickly. And then, oh, these deliciousness. So I had this dwarf pak choi, and then I also have 2 varieties of tatsoi, the Chinese cabbage, the green and then the red, which just delicious. So good, so good. Next category was best herb. And as I mentioned, I grew quite a few different herbs, you know, your standard parsley, basil for sure, some, what else? Thai basil, cilantro, things that didn't really last long. That's why I can't really remember them. One basil variety that this is kind of a runner-up, I would say, is the dark purple opal basil that I grew. Again, a lot of my seeds were from Baker Creek last year, but this one was really pretty. I didn't eat this, actually. This grew in my flower bed, so that's kind of an interesting caveat. I didn't really know where to categorize this or if it would have a place, you know, on the flower list or on the veggie list, but it was really beautiful. It was a standout plant in my flower bed this year. So I put that kind of on an honorable mention list. But the winner was my Vietnamese perilla. Believe it or not, this monster of a plant had another 1.5 feet to grow before I cut it down for the end of the season. It was absolutely awesome to have this plant in my garden. It was delicious. I got to experiment with it in multiple dishes and also pickled it in soy sauce, which is a traditional preparation for it. So yes, this tiny packet of seeds produced that giant plant. It's unbelievable. And it was really fun to kind of experiment with these in cooking. And really, it was just a gorgeous ornamental plant just on its own in the garden. So I will grow perilla again for sure. Next up is best root vegetable. And so, yeah, so this was a tough one because I grew a lot of radishes. I like radishes, so I grew a lot of them. In spite of me growing a bunch of radishes, spring and fall, the one variety that really stood out to me this year in both situations, both grow seasons, was this guy. So this is kind of an honorable mention for the root vegetable category, French breakfast radish. It was delicious. The spring ones were amazing. So I think I'm definitely growing this one again next year. But I want to give the accolade to a certain carrot. I did grow these little guys too, these Parisiennes, which were pretty successful. Overall, had some kind of timing issues with these, so I think they went a little bit late. That's probably my bad. But the performer that I just really need to recommend is this guy. So this was out of the Seed Savers Exchange stack of seeds that I had in my collection, the Danvers carrot. I've grown this a couple of seasons now, and it is the perfect carrot. It's the quintessential, stewing, salad, whatever you want to do with it, carrot. It's perfect. And it didn't disappoint again this year. It grew. I didn't have any issues with carrot flies or anything weird, in the soil that ate at them. They were just, when they were ready to pull, they literally just pulled them out of the ground, and they were big pile of carrots. I'll show you right here. Pictured here is one of 2 separate harvests I got from my Danvers carrots this season. Just an amazing grower and very uniform. So yeah, the best root vegetable award goes to the Danvers carrot in my book. This did amazingly well here. Moving right along. So we're in the peppers category now. So I did a ton of chili peppers and sweet peppers, kind of, I'd say equal amounts of both in terms of the varieties. So a handful of sweet peppers, a handful of chili pepper varieties, just to see what I liked. And I am thoroughly impressed with the 2 choices that I selected here for this category. So as far as the sweet pepper goes, the Corbaci pepper. This was my favorite. It might have been actually my favorite total pepper of either sweet or spicy. So this is a Turkish heirloom variety, and they grow really long and slender, and you can harvest them at any color stage. So they start out kind of yellow-green, and they kind of run the spectrum from yellow to orange to red. And they're delicious at really any stage. The Corbaci pepper is easily one of my favorite vegetables that I grew this year overall. It could win best in show, I don't know. But it was so easy to grow, just so prolific, so many peppers, and constant reblooming on the plant. I cooked with it, I ate them raw, I pickled them, and they were great. So it was super versatile, and they produced a ton of fruit. That was the thing. The pepper plant itself isn't that large. I grew it in a grow bag, and it just kept producing peppers. I don't know, 10 to a branch. It was nuts. So very prolific, very enjoyable, very versatile fruit to use when cooking or eating. So would definitely recommend Corbaci for your sweet pepper variety. The chili peppers were a little interesting because I had some interesting stuff happen with my peppers. The chili peppers were late kind of to start. I don't know if I just planted them out too soon or what, but they took a while to take off. But that just meant that I was harvesting them well past the point that I was expecting to be. So well into September in some cases. So a runner-up this year, it goes to the Thai chili pepper, which is usually a solid performer for me. I get a lot of fruit from this variety. But my big win goes to the Prick Chi Fa. This is a Thai variety of chili pepper that you can use and cook green or red. So yes, the winner of the chili pepper was the Prick Chi Fa. Basically a Thai hot pepper. They take about 70 to 85 days to mature. Again, you can harvest these ones when they're green through when they're red. You can let them ripen on the plant too. They're medium hot pepper. They are delightful. And I have a bunch of these in my freezer now from this past year's harvest. So I will be growing this one again. Best eggplant. I only grew 2 eggplants this year. I don't know. It was... I couldn't decide because both of these varieties were so pretty, but also would be, they would cater so well to, their intended use. So I grew a Chinese string eggplant as well as an Italian variety. Put those on the screen. So my 2 eggplant varieties are pictured here. Listata di Gandia, which is in the upper left. This beauty is known for its marbled skin and delicate flavor. And then the other one that I grew is a Chinese string eggplant, which is a really reputable variety. So the winner of the eggplant showdown was the Chinese string eggplant. Again, it was so prolific. I couldn't not include it. The Listata di Gandia grew quite a few fruit. I had 2 different plants though, so I think I was able to keep up the pace of harvest for those in, a fairly steady fashion, but these guys it was so many eggplants on the plant that off of one plant, the yield was even surpassed the Listata di Gandia. So I would say if you're looking for a lot at once, they are slender and narrow eggplants. They're good for stir fries and for, curries and other types of kind of Asian style dishes, I would say, that they cater really well to that. They stand up really well when you're cooking them. They're just a really great flavor as well. It's not like that bitter eggplant flavor that you can get from some of the larger varieties. It's just a very nice, pleasant eggplant experience with these. So I will be growing these again. All right, so I ended up growing 9 varieties of tomato this year, and that seems excessive, I know, but I was really trying out some new stuff. I wanted to know what I liked, and I liked a lot of them, honestly, but I have 2 favorites. So these guys split the prize for the best tomato of 2021 in the Leafy Geeks garden. So I'm going to show you both of those right now. This gorgeous tomato is the Aunt Ruby's German green variety. It's a German heirloom that stays green even when fully ripe, and it's perfect for salsa verde. This other variety is the orange peach tomato, and these have a reputation for tasting exactly like peaches. They are also extremely prolific, which means that they will hedge out and just produce all summer long. And yep, just to recap, so the Aunt Ruby's German green, which was just a phenomenal variety. And then I think this is probably, if I had to choose between the 2, this is the one, just because of how prolific it was. It just produced so much fruit, and I was able just so good. You could use it in a number of different dishes and uses for this tomato. So I'm definitely going to give it, if I had to give it, it's going to go to orange peach. I'm growing both of these again next year. Some of the others I may not. I just, based on the real estate they took up versus how much, yield I got from them, I'm just not sure they're the best varieties for my zone. But that's okay. You live and learn, you try, and you try again, and you experiment and find what you like. And that's what I did. Orange Peach, Aunt Ruby's German Green. So I did grow a couple of fruiting plants in my garden this year. Something that I'm really intrigued about. So I've grown raspberries and strawberries, but a special type of variety that really caters to basically a tundra environment. I think they're hardy. Both of these varieties are hardy through either zone 2 or 3, potentially for both of them. I grew Arctic raspberries and Arctic strawberries. I'll show you some pictures of those.
My Arctic raspberries are 1 season old. They flowered beautifully this spring and produced fruit, which was their first year doing so. The alpine strawberries were extremely intriguing. They kind of hit their stride midsummer and lasted through the fall.
So, I mean, I don't know that I would go back to like a traditional strawberry at this point. These were delightful. And if they can overwinter, this is going to be a test just to see how they do. They're in the ground. They're not in planters anymore. They are planted in ground. They are hardy to my zone, actually hardy to a zone above mine. Yep. So I think that I have a really good chance of just having perennial strawberries, which, mind blown, that's amazing. And they're very, very sweet, very, very strong strawberry flavors to both of these. These are really intriguing because you kind of trick your brain a little bit into thinking that you're eating an unripe strawberry, but it's very obvious what these are like when they're ripe, mainly by touch, by texture. They're just very soft and plump, and the white is a bright, bright white when they're ready. So that was fun. These varieties, I've got White Soul, Alpine Strawberry, and my Red Regina Alpine Strawberry. So I am excited to have these. I will continue to grow these. So now I think it's time to take a look at the flowers. And you won't see me on camera as much. I'm going to do a voiceover for this part because I have a lot of photos that I just wanted to show you and highlight some of my favorite flowers. So I'm really going to touch on kind of my favorite spring flower, my favorite summer grow season flower, and then kind of my overall favorite because I did have one. So here you go. Enjoy the flowers.
Not too shabby for a first-time flower bed, huh? I had so much fun with this project this season. It was so cool for a first-time experience with flowers. And I have my favorites. My spring favorite was this Twinny Apple Blossom Snapdragon. Grows about 12 inches tall. That was a wonderful producer. You got to give it to the pansies, though, and the violas. They just show up with so much color. Probably my favorites for the summer blooming flowers were the roses that I planted. These were not grown from seed, but also the zinnias. My favorite, I think, zinnia variety was the Queen Lime with Blush that I had planted in a few different spots in that flower bed. But ultimately, you guys, I've got to give it to the Brushstrokes viola. They were absolutely stunning. And these plants lasted all season, spring to fall. They did not die back for the hot summer. They did well through the drought, and they were the last flowers I pulled.
Okay, that's all from me, everybody. I know this video got a little bit long, but I had a lot of information to share and to go over, and there are some really, really exciting developments in the works for next year. Mainly my grow space that I created in this room that's kind of right behind me. You can see the lights on in there. So I have my own separate seed starting space that I won't have to monopolize kitchen real estate for, which is great. So all my shelves, all of my equipment is in there. I'm also investing in a greenhouse. I went in with my landlord on a greenhouse for the property. So we are going to have a seasonal greenhouse where I'll be able to get some things started a little bit sooner. So I'm hoping that might really help out with some of my chilies that I want to grow and experiment with next year. So yay, that's exciting. More information on that when that starts to come up when we get closer. That is all, you guys. Thank you for watching my garden recap. I really believe that getting out and getting your hands in the dirt and growing your own food is one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. So I am a huge advocate. Please let me know, reach out if you have any questions about getting started, because I started, relatively from scratch, but, in terms of small space gardening, there are a lot of options out there for people. So yeah, let's have that conversation. Let me know down below what your thoughts are. And then, yeah, until next time, until next gardening season, right? But in the meantime, enjoy your plants, your green and growing things, whatever is happening for you. Yay. Thanks for watching. Okay, bye.